Hello and welcome. We will get started in a little bit. I'm going to give people a couple minutes to sign on, but lovely to see you, Mom and Lori. So I have started recording, and then I do ask that you keep your microphone on mute unless you are asking a question. That just helps for everyone else to be able to hear. And then one other thing is that I will be utilizing the chat box feature. And if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, right underneath the images, there is a bunch of different graphics, and one of them says chat. It should probably be about the middle of your screen, and it's like an old-fashioned word bubble. And if you click on that, the chat will open. And I will keep the chat open on my screen so that if anyone has questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in there. You are also welcome to unmute yourself and ask the questions. So far, it looks like we have about 8 people on, so we might have a nice small group tonight, so we can answer a lot of questions. We'll just give folks a couple more minutes to sign on. Hopefully folks will come on here soon. And while we're giving folks time to sign on, if anyone has any specific questions, I'm happy to answer them, or questions from our previous sessions.
Someone asked me today if they can grow cucumbers up a trellis.
Yes, cucumbers are vines, and so production farmers grow them in the field and they just vine, over the ground. But most gardeners do grow them on a trellis, so something they can climb up.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, and different cucumbers, will have different habits. There are definitely some cucumbers that don't grow as tall. So actually, a lot of the smaller, like the munchkin type pickling cucumbers, are a little bit more bushier. So you don't need quite as tall of a trellis, but the cucumbers that we grow regularly get about 15 feet tall. So you can really grow them up pretty high if you want to. And actually, in our next class, so this session, we're going to talk about spacing and pest and disease management. And then next week, our fourth class, we're going to talk about crop maintenance, so how to care for your plants. And one of my favorite plant care tasks is actually pruning cucumbers. Pruning cucumbers and tomatoes to increase the yield per square foot is one of my favorite farm chores, actually. So we'll talk about that next week. All right. Well, it looks like we got some folks on here, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I just want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Bea Ayer, and I previously was the director of programs at Growing Hope and ran the farm and garden programs and the urban farm. Last Friday was actually my last day, but I'm continuing to do these workshops as well as some of the in-person workshops at the farm. So today, like I was saying, we're gonna talk a little bit about plant spacing since we ran out of time last week on that, and then we'll talk all about pest and disease management. Super fun stuff. But before we do that, since we do have a small group tonight, I would love for folks, if you are interested, to introduce yourself, and if you have any particular questions about pests or diseases already that you're hoping to get answered. So I will just have people popcorn style, unless no one goes, and then I can call on people. Would anyone like to start by introducing themselves?
Hi, I'm Preeti and I started vegetable gardening 2 years back. I also converted part of my lawn into a native flower, wildflower garden. And so both are pretty close to each other. And last year I noticed that I got a good crop from my vegetables. I think thanks to those pollinators.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
And I really like your classes.
Oh, thank you.
They've been full of information.
Garden. And can you hear me okay?
You're a little
Yes.
quiet.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
I can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is my first season trying to veggie garden, and I'm using a bag, like some grow bags, and yeah, I had just put out like some layers of like straw and like food and compost and this stuff, and I already had some digging in there, so we put up like a chicken wire around. So I'm trying to see how to work with that because I don't even have any plants in there yet, and there's already digging. So yeah.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Shannon. Can't see me, but I'm here. I am just starting out. This is initial information, and I want to plant some vegetables, maybe some fruit, and I know isn't covered in this class, but I would also like to plant some native plants. And I'm enjoying the class so far. It's been good information. And I'm also hoping to volunteer at some point here at Growing Hope. It's not that far from my house, actually, so it works out. Nice to meet everyone.
Hello.
My name's Catherine, and I just moved to the area from California, and I have no idea what I'm doing. It'll be my first time growing food, and even if it weren't, it would be a whole new climate for me. So I'm really I have no questions. I'm just trying to soak in as much knowledge as possible and take it from there.
Go ahead, Shashi.
Oh, okay. Hi everyone. My name is Shashi and I'm in New Jersey. So I have a backyard, but never thought of growing vegetables before. It's just I want to start on. I know it's a lot of work. I have 2 kids, so I'm trying to take it as a challenge in this, pandemic period, and devote some time to it. So this is step-by-step procedures is very helpful in knowing that what I have to do first, how to raise the beds and how to make the soil, so all these processes. Thank you so much for this information. This is really helpful me to understand how should I start. Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm Susie. I'm Bee's mom. And I've been gardening, vegetable and flower gardening for 50 years. And I'm learning new things every week. It's fantastic. So, and I'm sharing the information with everyone at my community. So that's it.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Mom.
I'm Lori. I'm from Ann Arbor, and I would have considered myself a seasoned vegetable gardener only because I grew up in a gardening family and my mom's father was a full-time gardener. But I am learning stuff at this too. So I kind of knew the practical part of things, but the science behind it, I didn't know. And so that was really helpful. My biggest thing is how do you control all these critters that keep coming in and taking all my beautiful green plants or vegetables just as they're getting ready to ripe. They realize that, and then all of a sudden they're gone the next day. My one question, and I don't know if you're going to cover it or not, is how do you get rid of nettles? those prickly nettle things. Like I dig and I dig and I dig, and I can never get to the bottom of the root. And then 2 weeks later, they're back. So if you have any hints for that, that would be very, very helpful.
Okay, well, thank you, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. Hopefully we'll get to all of those questions and more.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I was trying to raise my hand just to get in and introduce myself, if I may.
Yes, please do.
All right. You can't see me. My name is Kathy Green, and like one of the other participants, I've been growing and gardening for decades, but I decided to sign up for this just to see if there was anything new out there that I may not be aware of. I also have had trouble with critters, and this year I am actually redoing my entire garden. I am the one who spoke last week a little bit about the hardware cloth. And so I will be putting down 1/2 inch hardware cloth on the plastic wrapped on the ground, and then up all the sides. And I'll still be contemplating whether I do anything on top. But I also have had some critters that were taking bites out of my tomatoes. And so it'll be interesting to see what you have to suggest for that. Anyway, I've enjoyed your classes, and I will now mute.
Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, well, definitely let's talk about critters, because they are out there. All right, so I am going to share my screen with you guys. Just give me 1 second to get it right. All right. Can you all see my screen? It should say Gardening 101 with a picture of a woman with curly hair pretending to bite into a tomato.
Yes.
It shows up. Okay, great. Good. Even after, more than a year into the pandemic, I still feel like I'm adjusting to virtual classes, but it's nice to have a small group tonight, so we can talk more too. So the plan for tonight, we have about an hour and a half, and oops, I'm sorry. There's missing information in the agenda, but I will just very briefly introduce Growing Hope. I think most of you guys have been on the other classes. We can take some questions from our previous classes, and then we'll talk about plant spacing. We could take a break if folks need, and then we'll move right into the pest and disease management. And as always, I want to start our time together by taking a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on and that we share. And I want to acknowledge the history of this land, that it is unceded territory belonging to the Anishinaabe people, the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwa. And I'd like to honor the thousands of years that they took care of this land and farmed and managed this land, and state out loud and reject the myth that this land was vacant before European colonizers came. This land was very much loved and inhabited and cared for as a giant farm from here all the way out to the Great Plains and back. So I just want to thank the land that we cultivate, and I hope that we will find ways collectively to return the land to the Anishinaabe people and have a truth and reconciliation process. And I want to just take a second for us all to be able to think to ourselves what a respectful and reciprocal relationship to the land means to us. I know that it is something very different to different people, especially depending on their relationship with the land in terms of growing And I want to celebrate the amazing Indigenous folks that are fighting to protect our water and protect our land here. So thank you to all of them. I appreciate them. I appreciate their teaching and their grace, and their wisdom that they have shared with us, especially the agricultural wisdom of how to grow on this particular land in this particular climate.
Before you continue, will you be sharing these slides as you have the last couple of weeks?
Yes, I will. I will share with you guys either later tonight or tomorrow morning, both the slides from tonight as well as some other handouts on the topic.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and please feel free to share those. Someone asked last week if they could pass those on, and please do. Feel free. They're, you know, the wider the net, the better. The more people growing, the better. So. All right, so just very quickly, Growing Hope is an Ypsilanti-based nonprofit. This is year 17 for them, and the mission is to foster an equitable and sustainable local food system where all people are empowered to grow, sell, buy, prepare, and eat nourishing food. And I think that the work of Growing Hope is so important. Just because I'm not there anymore doesn't mean I don't find the work to be extremely important. I think the work right now, our collective work to take care of each other, as well as to take care of this land for future generations, is so important, especially during this time where the climate crisis is really causing havoc to our food systems and to people all around the world. And I see a future of food sovereignty as a possibility, and I believe that it can happen within the next 10 years if we all collectively focus on creating a more just food system. And part of that is understanding how our food system became how it is right now, and what we can do to change it, and what we can do to take care of each other outside of that system, so that we can have a concurrent system that is ready to go and already functioning as the old system fails. Just a quick review of last week. We talked about the seasonality of growing. Of course, the seasons and the weather are vital for our growing practices. It's how we plan our year. And of course, you know, living in the upper Midwest, also our lives have seasons and are circular, and so do our gardens. We talked so far about different soil types and what is soil, talked about the living soil food web and all of the bacteria and fungus that is in it that allows us to nourish ourselves. A little bit about soil testing, how to make compost, touching on companion planting, garden design, when to plant what, and a little bit on crop rotation. And I wanted to just take a second to see if anyone had any questions from last week or the week before.
I have one question. I don't know if it ties in with all of this, but it just might. Did you talk about, because I was really late last week, did you talk about rototilling or not tilling the earth?
We didn't talk specifically actually about soil prep, but I'm glad you bring that up. I was actually just talking with one of the farmers from the Ypsilanti Farmers Market, Nora Stevens, last night about tilling. So for those of you who haven't seen or aren't as familiar with this, a rototiller is an implement. It's a machine that basically blends the soil. It's like if you put all your soil in a blender and pressed pulse, a rototiller goes through the soil and turns everything vertically, and also breaks up clumps. And a lot of small growers, market growers, and home gardeners have what we call walk behind rototillers or push rototillers that go through the soil. They're also an implement that large scale farms use. They're mostly used for preparing a seed bed. So if you're planting from direct seed, it is helpful to have a very loose aggregate in your soil and have things be very well mixed. But if you are growing from transplant, it's actually not as important, and it's not something you need to do. And rototilling is actually very damaging to the soil. Soil, as we kind of talked about last week, is not an inert thing. It is an ecosystem. And so bringing in a machine that basically like pulverizes everything in that ecosystem does not help your garden grow. It is actually the fungus and bacteria that live on the outer edge of the soil clumps, what we call colloids, soil colloids. Those fungus and bacteria that hold those colloids together are also the fungus and bacteria that transforms the nutrients in the soil into forms that the plants can absorb. So we are actually dependent on those bacteria and fungus for us to be able to absorb nutrients. So, most folks nowadays try to discourage people from rototilling. It is a really easy and fast way to prepare your garden, but it does really pulverize everything. There's other walk behind tools that instead of moving the soil vertically, they move the soil horizontally, and they don't break up the soil to the same amount. So those are things that I recommend to use more than a rototiller. Sometimes people have very small rototillers, ones that are like a foot or so, that either will go between their rows of crops to kind of just weed. And those as the less deep you go with the rototiller, the less damage you'll do. So
I have a question, if I may, to follow up on that.
yes.
If you don't loosen the soil or till the soil, and I have one of the smaller go between the row kind of rototillers. It's not one that breaks up firm ground, but it will help loosen already loosened ground. So you've removed all of your plants in the fall, you've done your cleanup, you've got a lot of roots that are left from the previous year's plants in the garden, and you're wanting to put in new plants. The ground has solidified a little bit over the winter, it's kind of settled in. What do you do to assist the new roots that you're planting, the new plants that are going in, to have the air and a loose environment for those roots to spread?
Yeah. So I think what you're pointing out very, very acutely is that sometimes when you clean up your garden in the fall, sometimes you'll like cut the plants and leave the roots in the ground over the winter, which is a great thing to do because those plants have a lot of nutrients in them. They're full of carbon. They're full of organic matter that can really help the soil. So leaving those roots in is great. And then in the spring, it can be hard then if you're trying to transplant and there's like just physically the soil is kind of full of those roots. That it's not always a problem unless you have very high organic matter in your soil or we've had a very warm winter. Both of those things contribute to having more pests and diseases in the garden. So what I have been doing these past winters, because of the fact of the climate crisis, is I'll cut my plants and leave the roots in over the winter, and then about 2 weeks before I plant, I do something that is called single digging. I use what's called a digging fork. It looks like a pitchfork, but it has flat, thicker tines to it. And I actually put that in the garden bed and use it like a lever. I pull it back, and basically what it does is it just like lifts up clumps of the soil and brings in oxygen into that space. And then once I've done that throughout the bed, I rake it out, and raking it out helps to like pull out any of that, like that waste material from the previous year to the surface that could be troubling for you. And it also can kind of just break up the aggregates of soil on the very top layer, so that if you do want to direct seed, you can do that. So it's it's a little dependent on what you're planting. When I plant root crops like beets or carrots, I'll definitely like fork and rake the bed. But when I'm transplanting, collards or kale or things like that, I will just I'll just fork the bed and then I'll put them right in. It doesn't look as clean, but it does protect the soil a little bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe that's something actually to add to our handout list is some basic prep of the soil. Rototilling, it isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's definitely not a good thing to do on a regular basis. So it's something that people do very often if they're like breaking ground for the first time. It's when it's really useful. So yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions from our previous classes? All right, well, let's move on. So I apologize, last week I got so excited talking about compost, we ran out of time. So we didn't get to talk about plant spacing, so we'll talk about it a little bit now. So plant spacing is super important. It is something that helps prevent pests and disease. It is something that will help you to grow the most amount of plants in the smallest amount of space. It can help with watering. It can help with weed control. And it's also, of course, something you need to understand if you want to plan ahead for your garden, because you want to make sure that you're giving plants the right amount of space that they need. So what I like to do to figure out what the plant spacing is the first thing I do is I think about what the size of the plant is at its full maturity. So if everyone can kind of picture in their head a head of lettuce, a romaine or a buttercrisp, something that, you might buy from the grocery store, something that, is in a head form. So it's kind of compact, not the loose lettuce that you get that's often like a baby lettuce. Think about how big that head of lettuce is, right? That is the amount of space, the least amount of space that it needs in the ground, because if you don't give it at least that much space, it can't grow that big. So that's like the easy way to figure out plant spacing. There are, of course, a lot of charts for, how much space each different plant takes, and also depending on how you're going to be planting it. But I always start with just trying to visualize the plant itself in my head. Another good one to visualize is a head of cabbage. I think we all kind of know, cabbages, you can buy them larger or smaller. But if you can kind of picture that, and then when they're growing in the field, they have many outer leaves that are taken off and left in the field before they're taken and packed up. But you want to think about that size, and right, if that is the end product you want, you need to have at least that much space for the plant itself to grow. The other thing to think about is the plant's roots. So are the plant roots, do they go down very deep? Or are they shallow, more horizontal roots? How much space do those roots need? And an easy way to think about it is that usually a plant has an equal amount of matter on top of the soil as it does underneath the soil, if you have a nice loose aggregate soil. And then, of course, there's also different sized varieties of plants. last week we talked a little bit how there's plants that are bred to be very small and bushy and some that are bred to be very large. And then of course your real limiting factor, other than total space that you have, your limiting factor is how much nutrition is in your soil, because the plants need to get all of their nutrition from the soil. Of course, they get their energy from the sun, but the soil itself needs to have those nutrients. So if you have a very poor soil, if it doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it, each plant is going to need more space to collect those nutrients from. Another thing to think about is water, how much water is in your soil. And then also if there's any reason that you purposefully want to crowd the plant. And of course, just remembering that, when we're thinking about plant spacing, we're thinking about what the plants are going to take out from the soil. And we have to remember that anything we take from the soil, we want to rebuild and put back into the soil. So sometimes lettuce can grow very large. Here's a picture of a very large head of lettuce. So if you're going to grow really large lettuce like this, it just needs more space because it's physically large enough. However, if you wanted the same variety of lettuce to grow smaller, you could crowd it. So crowding plants closer together makes them actually grow smaller. It stunts their growth, and it can also make them grow more vertically. And of course, like the varieties on the left here, we have an eggplant in a container. It's a fairly bushy plant. The fruit are very close together in the center, and that's a small eggplant variety. On the right is the type of eggplant that are field grown. You can tell they're on stakes. I'm sorry, this picture is a little bit fuzzy, but you can see by those stakes how tall those eggplants are going to get. Eggplants in the field can get 7 feet tall in a season, in a Michigan season. So the varieties really do matter as far as how much spacing they need. And there's 3 other things that I like to think of. Actually, let's come back to this in a second. So one of the other things I was saying was about crowding plants. So this is a picture of snapdragons. Snapdragons are an annual flower in Michigan. And if you are growing them for cut flowers, if you're growing flowers that you want to be able to cut and put in a vase, you want those flowers to have as long of a stem as possible. And so snapdragons are one of the plants that we purposefully crowd for cut flowers. So in this picture, this is field grown snapdragons, and what's on top of the plants is basically a plastic grid. It's kind of like a very, very large fishing net. These are made for plants. Each of the squares are about 6 inches. And so you can see here, the snapdragons are planted about 6 to 8 inches apart, which is fairly tight compared to like what you would plant them if they were in a border garden or something like that. And planting them closer together makes them try to grow taller towards the sun to get energy, and makes their stems very long. So it results in tall plants. But that's for flowers. So then the other thing that, the other reason that we would want to put our plants as close together as possible, we want to put our plants to be basically so that when they're fully mature, they're like just about touching. That's going to give us the biggest yield per square foot, right? Because we're putting as many plants as close together as possible. And that has 2 other benefits that I think are really important. You can see on the right-hand side here, this is lettuce being grown in the Salinas Valley in California. Why we grow our lettuce in a desert, it's another topic to talk about. It's not a very smart thing that we do, but that is how most of our lettuce is produced. And you can see here that lettuce is ready to harvest. It is full size, and those plants are just touching each other. So they're getting the biggest bang for their buck, so to say. They're getting the most amount of yield per square foot in this situation. The paths are for the tractors and harvesting. but it also gives you two other benefits. And one of that is weed control. So if your plants are close together, they're preventing the sun from actually reaching the soil. And preventing the sun from reaching the soil is going to slow down the weed growth, right? If you have a big space in your garden where nothing is growing, the weeds are going to grow there. They're going to be like, thank you for giving me this beautiful bed to grow in and this lovely sunshine and all this nutrition. So actually putting your plants closer together and creating that shade underneath them does prevent weeds from growing.
May I ask a question based on this chart?
Yes, yeah.
In regard to your vine type plants, you did say that cucumber could be grown vertically on some kind of trellis. What about winter squash? I'm looking there, seeing winter squash and melon, 1 per square foot.
Yeah.
I know
This chart's a little off.
Okay. I'm thinking, boy, those things really spread.
Yeah.
So does zucchini. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, this is, you know, I always find that these square foot gardening things, for some reason, they're not always quite accurate. Cucumbers are vines, so if you're growing them vertically, you can definitely put 2 per square foot. But if you're laying them on the ground, you can only put 1 per square foot. But melons, yes. Melons need a lot of space. They're very large plants. I give my pumpkins 12 square feet each, and a little bit less for my melons and other winter squashes. But yes, those plants are going to grow and take over your bed. And if you plant them that close together, you're going to get some pretty bad diseases that we can talk about in a second. Let me see if there's anything else actually on this chart that I'm showing you that I disagree with, or if anyone else sees anything that seems off. The tomatoes, you can grow tomatoes in 1 square foot if you prune them, so if you're like cutting them back. But some of the larger slicing tomatoes, like the beef steak, the ones that you're gonna like cut and slice and put on a sandwich or something like that, I give them up to 2 to 3 square foot per space, per plant. And I find they do better that way. I don't like to crowd my tomatoes because then I miss them and then they rot and then they fall to the ground and then it smells bad and, you know, attracts critters and stuff like that. Other stuff, yeah, the summer squash, definitely I would give it more space. There are some compact varieties, but yeah, 1 square foot is a little small. And to be honest, for a lot of people who are growing in their backyard, it's really hard to grow winter squash. It's really hard to grow winter squash in general in Michigan because of some of the pests and diseases that we have, and crowding them into a small space just really makes it worse. Though it's so fun. So we always grow at Growing Hope. We always grow like a couple pumpkins and like a couple watermelons, really just so the kids can harvest them and have fun with it. But it's not something that we're, you know, going to grow enough of to consume.
So one question regarding the companion plants. So if tomato is taking so much space, can't we grow some leaves like spinach, kale, or cilantro underneath?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great thing to do. It's a great companion because you're using that space. And those kind of things like a little bit of shade. So those tomatoes can actually provide a little shade for those plants.
Okay, great. Thank you.
One question, why so onions and radish and cilantro, they need 9 square feet?
It's saying you can have 9 plants per 1 square foot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I don't know, that's also kind of dense, but you know, it really does depend on like how much sun you have and how much nutrients you have in your soil. At Growing Hope, most of our gardens are fairly shady. We have some really beautiful big trees on site, but that does mean that we have to plant some things a little bit farther apart just because they need more space to get the nutrients and sunshine. But things like radishes, right? Radishes are very small. They don't take a long time. They're usually very quick. They're like 21 days. And so they can be, put in pretty tightly. Now, the other reason that you want to put your plants close together is also to counter what is called evapotranspiration, which is one of my favorite words. So I'm always happy when I get to use it. Evapotranspiration is basically the amount of moisture that evaporates from the soil, and also the amount of moisture that is taken out of the soil from the plants transpiring. So the sun hitting the soil makes that moisture evaporate, and also the sun hitting the plants makes the plants draw up water from the ground, and then they're like breathing it out as well. So basically, evapotranspiration is how moisture is taken out of your garden bed. And the more densely packed your plants are, the less amount of sunshine that's going to get to that soil. And so it can also actually work to keep moisture in the soil. And in Ypsilanti and in, outside of Ypsilanti, like all the way out to the thumb, we have some pretty sandy soil in Michigan. Also, I guess on the west side where we grow all the blueberries and asparagus is also fairly sandy. So in sandy soil, right, we're losing a lot of water. And so putting your plants closer together can kind of help with that. And we're actually going to talk more about watering next class. So I'm going to hold off on that. But I will say basically you should water your plants when they look thirsty. When they start to droop is a good time to water them. Yeah, so that's a little bit about plant spacing and how to know how close to put them together. I did provide you guys with a square foot gardening cheat sheet last week that has more of the numbers that we use at our farm, and has some ideas of examples of beds. So we grow a lot of our stuff in the 4 foot by 4 foot beds. Those are the beds that we provide people for their home gardens. And so we have some examples in those handouts of like a pizza garden and a salad garden, how much you could fit into one.
May I ask a question on that? Because I am redoing my garden and I am going to have raised beds. And I do have the square foot gardening book. And he does promote the 4x4s. But if you are working within a confined space, mine is going to be 24 by 15, to only do 4x4s and then have to allot the 3 feet for a pathway in between the beds, I'm losing a lot of gardening space. And so what I'm wondering is, why limit the bed to 4x4 and not go 4x8 or 4x10 or 3x8 or 3x10?
So you don't, we give people the raised beds. It's an option. Sometimes people just grow, right in the ground in our programs. But people really like to have raised beds. Oftentimes, it keeps the soil in, it is nice looking, it helps for like mowing. But there's no reason that you actually need, a container to grow in. You can grow right in the ground, and you can grow, you can have paths, as narrow as you want, or as, wide as you want. In market gardening, paths are usually about 24 inches wide. So basically just wide enough for like your feet to walk through. But if you're gardening at home and you have young kids, you probably want to have wider paths just to make it easier to move around. As far as the raised beds being different sizes, the thing that you want to look out for is that the longer the raised bed is, so say it's 8 foot long instead of 4 foot long, that wood is going to try to bow out because the weight of the soil inside is going to push against that bed. And so you want to make sure that there's basically a brace holding them together. And so that's why, we basically are giving people in our program a 4 by 12 foot growing space, because we're giving them 3 4 by 4 foot beds. And we have those braces to basically hold the bed together from falling apart. And I think, you know, about every 3 to 5 feet, you really want to have a brace if you're using wood.
Well, that's a really good point. Normally, I have put in stakes that go in the ground that the side of the bed is, you know, secured to. But yeah, I hadn't taken into account. Now, what kind of wood do you use at Growing Hope?
We use just regular dimensional lumber that they sell, you know, at the big stores.
Yeah,
If
but
you
I mean,
have more
is it
money, cedar is the best thing to use because it is more rot resistant, or like a yellow pine.
do you use 2x6s? Is that what you're using?
We
Or
normally
2x8s?
use 2x8s.
2x8s. Okay, and probably it's usually pine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, we use a pine. So.
And then how many years do you find that pine lasts?
It depends on how you water, and how frequently you water. But you know, about 4 years, 4 or 5 years.
Okay, and then that has to be.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, then they rot.
Oh, I know.
So yeah.
The cedar does last longer. It is a lot more
last
expensive.
longer, yeah, but it is triple the price. And wood right now is also very expensive. There's very high demand for wood right now.
Yes.
So
it's double what it has been in the past. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, I have a quick question about that.
Yeah,
Is
sure,
it
go ahead.
possible to put some kind of protective, like shellac varnishy kind of stuff on that wood so that it will last longer?
There are a couple of different products that you can use. In Ann Arbor, there's a store called Be Green, and they sell a couple different products that are supposed to be like a more natural, like a shellac, that are water-based, so they're non-toxic. I haven't found that they work that well. I've tried a couple different ones. They're very expensive, and I found that they wore off within about a year. Some people will oil their wood, so you can use like a linseed oil or something like that, and that will protect the wood a little bit longer. And then another option you can do is actually put a barrier between the wood and the soil. They do sell like specific products for this at gardening stores that basically create like a little air bubble between the soil and the wood, so it helps the wood dry out. I have used landscape fabric, which is that black fabric with like the yellow or green lines, for that, and it lets a little bit of moisture and air through, but so that, you know, that's helpful. And I've also actually used Tyvek. Tyvek is a brand of house wrap. It's what you put on your house before, you know, you put the finishing siding or something on whatever you're using. And it's made of the same type of plastic as landscape material, but it does last a little bit longer, I find. But some of the house wrap actually has PFAS sprayed on it to keep water out, and so, you know, you wouldn't want to use that in your garden, unfortunately. So
I just read that using the plastic that people line their ponds with is an option. What do you think about that?
That is an option, but it's not a breathable product. There's like no air that's going to go through it. And so you want to make sure that you have a bottom that can drain really well.
Yeah, no, I meant just
on the side.
Around the wood, just on the sides.
Yeah.
For the wood.
Yep, you can definitely do that. And you can buy pond, just like the flat pond liner material online. There's different thicknesses that you can get. I've used that for like taller beds and, you know, beds, table beds, the beds that you can like sit underneath. I've used those and it works fairly well. So it is a little bit more expensive, but you're gonna be able to use it for like 10 years.
Well, yes, and when you're spending a lot of money on wood, it's worth that investment.
Yeah.
May I ask one more question on
Sure,
raised
yeah.
beds? Okay. I'm older. I have a bad back, so I'm contemplating higher raised beds of 24 to 27 inches. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a great idea. Raising, having taller raised beds can make gardening a lot more enjoyable and more, sustainable. So I think, anything that you can do to help take care of your body while you're gardening is a really good thing to do. Yeah, so yes, I think that's a great idea. We often provide people with beds. 24 inches or 27 inches is the height. This like the minimum normally for wheelchair, or we do 32 for folks in walkers. But yeah, having a nice raised bed is great, and you don't have to fill the entire thing with soil. You can have a false bottom in there. You can fill it with logs. I don't recommend putting plastic in there, but yeah, I think that's a great idea. So
Well, then I don't want to monopolize the time, but then I do have one more question.
maybe let's talk about it at the end actually, and then
Very
we'll
good, thank you.
get along here. Yeah. All right, so this is a big topic, pest and disease management. And I would be happy to talk about this for like weeks on end. So I'm really gonna try to squish some like basic concepts in, thinking about like what can just like really help you have a successful garden. And I'm sorry, also I have a dog in the background who's barking sometimes. Where I like to start with this is in thinking about plants and thinking about our relationship with the plants and our relationship with the soil in similar ways that we think about our relationship to ourselves and our bodies and our loved ones. And of course, the more time you spend with your plant friends, with your real friends, with your family, right, the better you know them and the better they know you. And I think that is very similar for plants. The more time you spend in your garden with your plants, the more deep your understanding of those plants will become, and the deeper your relationship with the soil will become, and the easier gardening will become, and the easier keeping pest and disease away. So I really, kind of think about it of like, how do we build and maintain our own health? What do we do to take care of ourselves to prevent, us from getting sick? I think, of course, we're in a global pandemic, so this is a great time to think about that. But if people could maybe just like shout out a couple things that you do to maintain your own health.
In regards to taking care of our gardens or in general?
Just to your own body. Like, what's one thing that you do to take care of yourself?
I remind myself to sit down next to my beds instead of leaning over, standing up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so you think about like how your body is moving and how it's supported. That makes sense. Well, I will say one thing that I am doing quite a lot these days is sanitizing my hands, washing my hands after I touch things. What
Getting
else do
enough
people
sleep?
do to prevent yourself from getting sick?
Getting enough sleep and enough exercise.
Mm-hmm. Sleep and exercise. Keeping your, all your organs functioning well, optimally, keeping your brain going. There's another big thing that I think we all probably think about in preventing illness.
Being
Plenty of
outdoors.
fluids.
Say again? Oh, fluids. Mm-hmm. Making sure you have enough fluids, that's really important, right? To keep those systems functioning well, to get rid of the toxins and bring in the nutrients throughout our body.
Yeah, vitamin D, the sunlight, which is needed for immunity.
Yeah, and then one other thing that we do is our diet. right? We try to eat well. We eat foods that make ourselves feel well. We eat foods that have a lot of nutrients in them. And we check up on ourselves, right? We ask ourselves, how are we doing? Do I need to sleep more tonight? Do I need to change my diet? And do I, have a close friend that's sick that I've been spending time with that maybe I need to, wash my hands, or maybe just take care of my immune system a little bit more, so I don't get sick. And those are all things that are actually quite similar to taking care of plants. And the best way to take care of your plants and to avoid sickness in the plants, to avoid pest and disease, is to have a healthy plant and a healthy soil. That is the number one thing that you need to have healthy plants. And it's similar to us. When we're run down, when we haven't been sleeping enough, we haven't been eating enough, maybe the food we have been eating hasn't had enough nutrients in it, right? We are more likely to get sick. And plants are exactly the same way. If plants don't have the right amount of nutrients, or if they have too much of like junk food, right? They become sick. If they are run down, say they're like ragged, they will attract more insects to them. And so thinking about, starting with a healthy plant, starting with a healthy soil, and maintaining that health. That is the best thing that we can do for our plants in our garden, for success. So I think, understanding what a healthy plant looks like is super important. Does it have green leaves? Does it have great growth? Do the roots have room to expand? Is the soil full of nutrients for them? Do I need to add any nutrients to my soil? How is the biological activity in my soil? Do I see do I see like insects or bugs in my soil? Do I see pollinators around in the environment? Do I see bees? How is the texture and the structure of that soil, right? Like, does it drain well? Does it have those nice colloids, or has it been like rototilled to nothing? So really observing the health of your soil and your plants is the most important thing that you can do. And so, a lot of that just really takes time in the garden. But I think keeping that in mind and having that mindset is really going to help you succeed as a gardener at any stage of gardening. And then the next thing that I like to think about is what we call, so there's a phrase called integrated pest management, or IPM, a lot of people call it. And basically what it means is thinking about pest management and disease management from a holistic perspective that brings in all of the different environmental factors, the host factors, right? It brings in like the whole ecosystem of your garden into the equation of how to reduce pest and disease. And so there's this triangle. So when we're thinking about pest management and disease management, there's three things that are really important. So one is the environment that plant is in. So what are the conditions of that environment? What is the nutrients in the soil or lack of nutrients in the soil? What are is it sunny? Is it shady? Is it too hot? Is it cold, right? Like what is the environment that the plant is growing in? And then, right, the host. So to get a pest or a disease, you have to have a plant that those pests or diseases are attracted to. You're not going to have asparagus beetles on cucumbers, right? Because that's the wrong host. And then the other thing is just the actual, the pathogen. So are those pathogens in the area? Is there an abundance of those pathogens, or is there just a little bit of them in the area? And I think this actually is like it's kind of helpful to think about coronavirus also this way, right? So like, am I in an area where there is a high amount of virus, right? Am I in an area where the environmental conditions spread the virus, right? So we know for coronavirus, it's spread through the air and droplets, and so being outside, right, there's going to be less amount of that virus. And then of course the host is like, are we susceptible? Do we have compromised immune systems? Do we have compromised lungs, right? So there's these three different factors. And to have a disease or to have a lot of pests on your plant, you need all three, right? You need to have the plant, you need to have the pest, and you need to have an environment that pest does well in. So when we are thinking about controlling and preventing pests and disease, we can think about these three things and changing them, right? Because if we have a host and the environment, but we don't have the pathogen, we're not gonna have a problem, right? So these are three main factors that we can control to some degree and think about in planning. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about this like concept of disease management?
No, I think you said that very clearly.
Yeah, and this is, something that like, sometimes I go out in my garden and I get really flustered sometimes, and I have to like come back to thinking about this. Like, what are the basic things that I want to be thinking about? And so, okay, so what do we actually do with that information? Like, what does that actually mean? So one is prevention. So the first thing, right, is high quality transplants, if you're planting by transplant, good quality seed, and the soil itself. So, when you go and you buy transplants from the big box stores, they're usually shipped up from the south. So even though Michigan has some, we have like the second largest bedding plant industry in the US. We grow, right, a lot of flowers and annuals and bushes and things like that. Most of the vegetables transplants that are sold at the big box stores come up from the south, and they're gonna bring with them all those pests and diseases. And it also, if you go, a lot of times at the big box stores, the plants, they're not, sometimes they're dried out, sometimes they're like sad looking, they're broken, right? So like the healthier the plant you start with, the healthier the entire life cycle of that plant is. So prevention is really key. So also with the seeds, knowing that you have seeds that are high quality, that aren't carrying any diseases. For certain plants like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, there are some viruses that are carried on the seed themselves. And so I often will actually wash those in a very small amount of like a bleach solution. So like about a 4% bleach solution, and that just kills the viruses before I put them in the ground. So the other thing is to know your pests, right? So what you're going to be looking out for is very important. Know the diseases, again, know what diseases look like so you can look out for them. And then also know the thresholds. And basically what that threshold is like how many pests on this head of broccoli are okay with me, right? Like, am I okay having a head of broccoli that I bring into my house that has a ton of aphids on it? Maybe it's fine. Maybe you don't mind washing them off. But maybe you do mind, maybe you don't want any, right? So knowing like both your personal threshold for dealing with pests and diseases and also the plant, like how many aphids can live on this broccoli plant before it really hurts the plant. Because having zero pest and disease is not realistic, right? And this idea of having no pest or diseases is why our supermarkets and our farms waste so much food, right? Because that food that perhaps has some pest or disease damage doesn't make it to the supermarket. So it's creating a ton of waste in our society, and it's also poisoning our food and our soils, right? Because if we won't purchase foods that have pest or disease damage, that means that farmers need to use a lot of chemical pesticides or fungicides. And that is both dangerous to ourselves, it's dangerous to the soil, and it's dangerous for our future generations, especially since some of these pesticides do have multi-generational effects that are very scary. So, we're not going for no pests, we're not going for no disease. There's going to be some, and we just have to figure out how to manage what we have. And then to know a little bit about those diseases and how they travel can really help you prevent their spread. So some diseases are airborne. So for example, powdery mildew, which is something that affects squash plants, pumpkins, cucumbers, things like that. That powdery mildew, and I have a slide a little bit down, is transferred in the air, right? So there's not very much we can do about it. We can't build an airtight enclosure around all of our cucumbers. And so, some diseases are soil-borne, some spread in water, some can exist in cold climates, but not warm climates, right? They really vary. So what you're gonna do, right, we're going to, number one, we're gonna prevent pest and disease. Number two, we're gonna monitor to see what we have and what we wanna do about them, and we're gonna know the thresholds. And then when it's time to actually take an action to do something about it, we have a tiered approach. So first, right, prevention, right? We're doing that. We talked about that a lot. And then a physical. So that would be physically removing the pests, right? That is going to be the first thing that we go to when it comes to pest and disease. If we find plants that have too much pest or disease on them, you're going to either remove part of the leaves of the plant that are affected, you're going to physically take off the pests themselves, or you're just going to take that whole plant out, right, and get rid of it. So physically controlling is going to be our first action. If that doesn't work, you can go to a biological approach. Biological approach includes things like bringing in helpful insects or bringing in predators for the pests. It can include bringing in specific bacteria that will help the good nematodes grow or help the plants grow out of a disease. And then the last thing that we're going to think about is using a chemical approach, like a pesticide or a fungicide or something like that. And that's because, right, this is also a triangle of risk. So prevention has very little risk, right? Physical stuff, mechanical prevention doesn't really carry a lot of risk. Biological could, and then of course using chemicals can create quite a large risk for yourself or your family. All right, so that's kind of the framework. When I think about sustainable growing, this is kind of how I think about it. This is my framework. This is where my mind is going, and it also, right, it shapes my day. So if I'm in the garden, I'm going to first work on making sure of prevention, right? I'm going to make sure my seedlings are doing well, my plants are doing well. And then I'm going to scout, right? I'm going to take a look around and see what's happening. And then if there's something bad, right, then I'll start with the physical controls and then on up. So this kind of frames both our work seasonally, right, in caring for the soil, but also daily, what I do in the garden. Actually, I guess before I go into these specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these specific controls, as well as the pests and diseases that are most prominent in Ypsilanti. But does anyone have any questions about this framework first?
I had a question about removing those plants, the plants that you remove that have pest, something on them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you put it in your compost or you put it in a garbage bag?
Oh, that's a good question. There are a couple for most things I will put in my compost.
Mhm.
If there is like aphids or other insects, things like that, I will put in my compost because I know that I take care of my compost and that those things are going to die. There's a couple insects that don't die at 150 degrees. They can really live quite at high temperatures, including leaf miner. And I have a picture of it in a couple slides. And that is something that I actually throw the plant away in the garbage because I don't want it on site anymore. I also, at work at Growing Hope, we have a far compost pile. So it's a compost pile that's like the farthest possible on our site from where we grow our plants. And that's sometimes where we'll put things that have a little bit more pest or disease than we feel like a regular compost pile can take care of. Also, we put in there things that have weed seeds. Like if I'm, cutting the grass and it's already all gone to seed, I'll put it, kind of farther away.
Okay,
But yeah, there's definitely some things I throw away, and we will get to that.
thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about this like framework or this approach to pest and disease management? All right, well, let's get to the nitty gritty fun stuff. Okay, so like I said, physical controls, that's like our number one. That's like the first thing I go to. And that is, right, picking the right site for your plants, right? If you grow a plant that needs full sun in the shade, it's not going to do very well, right? It's just tomatoes need sun. If you plant them in the shade, they're going to be sick. So, picking the right spot, site selection, garden design is very important. And then the next thing for physical controls is literally just picking the bugs off of the plants. On the right-hand side there is a picture of someone picking potato beetles off of a plant. I, at least once a week, will walk throughout my whole garden, or at Growing Hope, I'll walk throughout all of the plants and look at them and do physical, what I call scouting. So I'm like looking for pests, and then where I just like physically remove them. And I usually, most days, I actually start my days this way at Growing Hope as I walk around and pick off the bugs. Now, these are going to be things that you can see that are large enough, like these potato beetles, or things like caterpillars that are on your crops, things that I can like easily pick off and get rid of. And then also weed eradication. So if you have weeds in your garden that attract the same pests or diseases as your plant, you want to get rid of those. We in Ypsilanti, we have a really bad powdery mildew problem, especially these last couple of years with the warmer winters. We've had powdery mildew pretty much all year round, and there are weeds that powdery mildew also grows on. So they grow primarily on squash plants, so pumpkins, cucumbers, melons, things like that. But they also love henbit, which is one of the early spring weeds. And sometimes they'll grow on wild chicory, like dandelion leaves. So keeping those specific plants out of your garden area is going to help decrease the diseases you have. So another way of doing a physical control is putting up barriers. So preventing those pests or diseases from actually getting to your plant, right? And I know a lot of you have said you have some pests. Pests are insects, pests are people, pests are groundhogs, pests are moles, pests are butterflies, slugs. And so finding a way to keep them out of our garden is pretty important. On the right hand, the picture that is of a insect netting. It's something that they sell at most garden supply stores now. It's basically like, it's just like a netting that is small enough that it keeps those insects off your plants. And so if I am growing cabbage or yeah, mostly cabbage early in the season, or like bok choy or things like that. During the early season, the crop, right, bok choy or cabbage, are very susceptible to cabbage worms, cabbage moths. And so just covering the plants with something like this prevents those insects from getting onto the plant and laying their leaves. And so the caterpillars are never born on the leaves. And so that's a way to physically keep them out. I don't do that later on in the fall, because in the fall it's too hot often for those pests, for cabbage moths. And so thinking about that triangle, right? Like in the fall, I have the host and I have the pest, but I don't have the right environment for it. So, but in the spring, I do have the right environment. So sometimes I'll use a cover, like something like this. Another thing you can do is they sell a clay product. It's just basically clay, and you mix it in water and you dip your plant on it, and it creates a very thin coating of the clay over your plant, and that's going to prevent pests from wanting to lay their eggs on it. And that's mostly for brassicas, so broccoli, things like that. Sluggo keeps things. A fence. So if you have groundhogs can climb. They climb 4 feet easily. They also dig. They can dig down, many feet for their burrows. And so having a high quality fence, if you have groundhogs or squirrels, skunks, neighbors that come in, is just very important. For groundhogs, one of the things that I recommend is digging down 2 feet, putting your fence, down 2 feet, and then having it be at least 4 feet tall. And then on top of that, what I add is a loose wire. So it's like a tension wire, something that you would, you can buy it at the big box stores as a picture hanging wire. You can also buy it in the fencing department as it's like top wire for fencing. And basically what it means is that, like, if the groundhogs climb up that 4 feet of fence that you have, but then they try to like stand on that wire and it's loose, they fall. It's kind of a funny way to keep them out, but it does actually work. But yes, a good fence, if you have groundhogs, it's just going to be important. And then, trying to reduce the amount of groundhogs you have around. So not having brushy areas where they can hide, not having areas where they can dig and like create burrows, not having a ton of food available to them. And then, trapping if you have them as well. And Ypsilanti is full of groundhogs and moles and squirrels. So, fencing is very important. Also, this row cover, this like the insect netting also actually discourages those animals. Oftentimes I will put it just like laying it right on top of beds of like carrots when they're small, or spinach or lettuce, something like that. And even like bunnies, they don't like to climb underneath it because they feel like trapped. And so it can be an effective way to keep them out as well. But it does require having those products on hand. And then also for things like cutworm, you can make little collars out of tinfoil that you can put around the base of your plants that can also keep those things away, the cutworms away. So that's kind of the physical side of things. And then the next thing is the cultural, right? So thinking about the environment, and also thinking about what we're putting in. So resistant strains. We in the fall, we have something called downy mildew in Ypsilanti. It's pretty much everywhere. And there are specific varieties of basil that were bred specifically to not be sensitive to downy mildew. So I always plant those varieties. I basically don't plant the like regular varieties of basil in the fall anymore because they get the downy mildew and then they turn yucky and no one wants that. And then of course, like choosing the good seeds and seedlings, crop rotation. So not having things in the same bed year after year after year, if you grow cucumbers in the same bed year after year, you're basically going to be like breeding those mildews and the cucumber beetles in those beds. So putting something different in those beds the next year, mixing it up, is going to help. And then sanitation, right? So we're all washing our hands all of the time. If you are touching a tomato plant that has blight, that has a disease that is transferred physically through touch, right? And you touch one tomato and then you touch the next tomato, you yourself are the vector of that disease. And so when I am pruning my tomatoes, I actually carry a small bottle of bleach water with me and spray my tools in between each plant. And that prevents the spreading of disease. Next is the biological. So thinking about how we can use biology and nature for our advantage. Flowers are an amazing biological control. I think last week we talked a little bit of having these tiny flowers like alyssum around strawberries because it attracts sylphid flies. That's actually what the picture is of, is a sylphid fly on alyssum. So having the beneficial insects is really helpful, and you can either, buy them and release them yourselves, or you can plant flowers that will attract them. And then of course there's also biological pesticides that you can use. A common one that people know about is BT, because there's BT corn. But also say you have a pond in your backyard or you live near a wetland. They make little BT like dunks that you can put in there that basically prevent the mosquito larvae from living on the top of that water. So these are controls that use biology, right? So it's a bacteria that is harming the insect, not a poison per se. And these biological pesticides are often less dangerous for humans as well. So let me pause for a second because we just talked about physical, cultural, and biological to see if folks have any questions about that. And then I'm going to show you pictures of like more specifically.
Could you please say what are some of the aromatic herbs that you
Yeah, so I love planting marigolds. I plant marigolds all over my garden. Marigolds, they have a very strong scent, and that they have that scent in their roots as well. So they are great for keeping nematodes away from your tomatoes. I usually plant like a marigold every 3 tomato plant in my garden at home. Cilantro, right, has a strong smell. Fennel has a strong smell. Anise hyssop has a strong smell. Let's see, are there other ones that other people use? You can kind of think about it as like citronella, right? Those citronella candles that we burn to keep the mosquitoes away. Those are like, well, that comes from geranium or lemongrass, depending, right? But those are like aromatic things that keep the insects away.
How about mint?
I don't think that mint. I'm not sure actually. It's a good question.
Plus mint spreads like a weed.
It does, yeah. You do want to be careful.
I would think it would like interfere with everything.
It could, yeah. I usually keep mint like in its own bed, or I'll actually just put it in a pot in the bed, so the roots can't go anywhere. Any other questions about physical or cultural controls? The one downside I will say about physical controls is that not everyone likes picking and squishing worms. So,
gloves when we're picking?
Yeah, you can wear gloves. Okay. Yeah. it's sometimes hard to remember that when we're gardening, what we're doing is not natural, right? Growing food in the way that we do in intensive growing of vegetables in this way, it's not a natural process, right? You would never have a row of corn and then a row of broccoli in nature. And so what we're doing is we're manipulating nature and we're trying to use it to our advantage to grow the food. But of course, what comes with that is pests and diseases and things like that. So, you know, it's hard sometimes, you know, you have a nice organic garden and, you know, I mean, I do eat meat, but I'm mostly vegetarian. And so sometimes when I spend my entire day squishing caterpillars, I'm like, is this really what I should be doing? Like, this is not a very nice thing to do. Like, people like butterflies and I'm squishing them all. And you just have to kind of remind yourself that, like, we're growing food. It's not natural. We're trying to, like, be the least harmful as possible to nature. You know, but you got to know what your goal is, right? So do you want beautiful black swallowtail butterflies or do you want carrots? You can't usually have both, so you got to choose. All right, so I want to just talk quickly about a couple of my favorite beneficial insects. And one is ladybugs. Ladybugs are amazing. I think it's pretty common. People know, I mean, they're, you know, their name is cute. They're cute. They have these little polka dots. And they are aphid eating machines. Oh my God. They're like so cute and lovely. And then you look at them closely and you see them just like chowing down on aphids, which is a small pest. Ladybugs are great. I often buy them at the beginning of the season and release them in our hoop houses to eat the aphids. They eat whiteflies, they eat Colorado beetle. And you can also attract them to your garden by having flowers that they like. They like ferny flowers, they like dill and dandelions, they like, you know, bright things. So ladybugs are great. Ground beetles are really great. You know, they eat slugs and caterpillars, they eat cutworms, and I often plant amaranth in my garden specifically to attract these beetles. Amaranth, which is the leaves are eaten, like a callaloo or like a sag, right? It's like a spinach leaf. The grain of amaranth is used, well, I'm sorry, the seed of amaranth is used as a grain. And then, of course, the flowers of amaranth are also used. They're very beautiful. And it attracts ground beetles. So oftentimes I will plant some amaranth like at the end of my bed, or I'll plant it like in a far corner just to attract the beetles so they can help me out a little bit. And then the pirate bugs and green lacewings are also things that you can attract with some of these lovely small flowering plants, the plants that physically have small flowers. And you can also buy them in and release them in your garden. But beneficial insects are really great, right? It's a biological control that you don't have to do yourself. You just attract them and then they're there. It's really using nature to our advantage. And I think, you know, having areas of your garden and yard that you let be kind of wild, where you let things flower to attract these insects is great, not only for your garden, but of course, you know, we do have problems with the die-off of bees and things like that. So, you know, attracting pollinators is a really great thing. Native plants are great for that. And you know, if you're looking at this list of the plants, you might notice like, oh, a lot of these are the same things. Fennel, dill. Oh, we have spearmint. So that's good. Maybe mint does actually help attract damsel bugs. So the other important thing to note about these insects is that these are good bugs. These are things we want. Right? There's insects that we don't want, like aphids, and then there's insects that we do want, like aphid midges. Those, they eat aphids. So knowing what they look like is very important so you don't accidentally kill them, right? Because if you're going around picking cabbage worms off and smushing them, you know, and you don't know what a damsel bug is, you might also smush that. So I actually sometimes have like this kind of thing just like printed, and I'll have it in my garden so that I can look at it if I forget. And I want to show you a couple of really cool pictures of them. So on the left hand side, this is a ladybug, an adult, and it is eating all of these green things. These green things are aphids. Aphids are a very common pest that we have in Ypsilanti. They can be yellow, green, red, brown, white. There's all different varieties. They are attracted to pretty much all the vegetables. They really love greens. They will like burrow into broccoli heads. They like to hide in there. They will be on the backside of kale or collard greens. And you can actually tell often from afar if you have an aphid problem with your greens, because where they lay their eggs and hatch, they will curl the leaf. It actually like curls the leaf around them and protects them. So you can kind of see that from afar. But as you can see, this ladybug is just chowing down. It's very happy to have a nice dinner. That's doing great. And on the right-hand side, this is, I think this is the third end-star stage. So insects, right, they go through different stages in their lives, kind of like a metamorphosis. But ladybugs at this stage, this is under a microscope, so you can see it pretty well. But they kind of look like super weird, tiny crocodiles. And I just think they look so cool. They're like so strange looking and tiny, and they look absolutely nothing like a ladybug. And they're fun. We always have kids every year. We have like teens in our program who will find them on a leaf and like come running like, oh my God, look at this crazy bug I found. And I'm like, don't smush it. It's a baby ladybug. So I wanted to show you guys that so you know not to smush it. Cool, crazy alligator looking things. And here we have some white flies. You can kind of see what they look like, really close up, as well as their eggs. And what is important to know about eggs is that if you find eggs that are very close together like this, it's very likely that they are not a beneficial insect. It is very likely that they are insects that eat plants. And that's because, right, they lay their eggs so close together because when they hatch, they're going to have enough food. Insects that don't eat plants, that eat other insects, their eggs are planted farther apart from each other because they need to be spread out to find food. So if you're looking at the underside of a leaf, which is normally where you'll find eggs, and you see a lot of small eggs very close together, they're usually not good things and you want to smush them. On the right-hand side, this is a tomato hornworm. We have them in Ypsilanti. We usually get them about mid-July is when I start looking for them. They are the same color as the tomato plant, and they can eat like a whole tomato plant in one day, this like tiny little thing. You'll know you have them if you one day walk up to your tomato plant and it's just a stick. That means that all the leaves have been eaten by these little guys. They're fat. They're the same color. They're kind of creepy looking, and they often get parasitized. So there's a wasp that lays its egg on the tomato hornworm. These little white things, those are egg sacs. And when they hatch, the little baby wasps eat the tomato hornworm from the inside out. So if you see a tomato hornworm that has these white egg sacs, you want to leave it in your garden because they're going to hatch, and those are beneficial insects for you. They also are very creepy. So if you want to move them somewhere else so they're not like where you're picking tomatoes, you can do that. But you definitely don't want to smush them. And then the last method for control of pest and disease is going to be a chemical control, something that's going to be like a poison, right? Something that's going to chemically kill things. And there are, of course, chemicals that are very dangerous to us and chemicals that are less dangerous to us. My go-to chemical pesticide that I use is a mixture of oil, soap, and water. That's it. I don't use Dawn, that's what's in this picture. I just use whatever dish soap I have. I use like a natural biodegradable dish soap. And you take a big thing of water and you put, like, you can see that spray bottle there, right? It's probably about 32 ounces. You want to put a couple teaspoons of the oil in it and a couple teaspoons of the soap. And basically what that does is if you spray it on the insects themselves, soft-bodied insects like aphids have very soft skin, and it actually gets coated in that oil and it'll suffocate them basically. And so this is something that you can make at home. It's not going to have any harmful effects on you or the soil. It does wash off, so you reapply after a rain, but it's super easy to make. You can also buy products that is this. There's something called Safer Soap. It's basically the same thing. It's just soap and oil mixed with water and sprayed on. So that's a super easy thing to use. Something a little bit heavier duty that does have some potential harmful side effects is copper. Copper is really great for killing fungus and things like that. But it is also it is a nutrient, so we all need a little bit of copper in our system, but too much becomes toxic. So you do want to be careful with it. So no matter what kind of chemical you're using, whether it's a product that you buy from a store or something you make at home, just be a little bit careful knowing what it is and how it works, because you don't want to be, hurting yourself. Another chemical that people often use is neem. Neem is an amazing plant. It's often used in like toothpaste, things like that, and it has pesticide properties in the oil naturally. So it's something that you can use. All right, so it is 7 o'clock. So, and once again, I have gone over. I apologize for that. Let me see how many more slides I have here. Okay, let's see. Do you guys want to go for another 10 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So for anyone that has to leave, thank you for being with us. But I will continue and I'll kind of run through these. And like I said, I'm going to send these out to you guys so you have it. And we can talk more about some of it next week as well. So those are, our controls, like our options. We can have a physical control, a biological control, a chemical control. Those are the options that we have. But, when you come up to a plant, you got to basically figure out what's going on. So looking at your plant, you want to come and first, think about the environment. Is there something in the environment that could be hurting it? Is it too cold? Is it too hot? Is it burnt? Is there too much ozone? High ozone can be dangerous for people, but also for plants, right? Is it a disorder? Is there like something weird in the soil that's causing it to be this way? Is it a disease or bacteria or fungus? Is it a pest? Right? There's a lot of like options of what could be wrong with your plant. But there's some simple rules that can help you determine exactly what it is. So the first thing is to think about, is it a physical problem? So on the top left, we have a plant, it's all like curled up, right? So that plant is dry. That plant needs water, right? So that's a physical problem. That plant just like doesn't have enough moisture, so the leaves are curling. It's called leaf curl. And that's a physical thing. It's pretty easy to fix. You water your plant, and they tend to outgrow it. Another physical thing that we often see on peppers is called sun scald. So the pepper on the left, that's a sweet green pepper, and basically it has a sunburn. So peppers, they grow in the hot weather, and hot peppers love hot weather and sunshine, but they actually don't love the sun directly on them. So if for some reason you don't have enough foliage on your pepper plants, or say, you just have a ton of peppers and it's like super, super sunny, sometimes you'll see something like that, and that's actually just the sun scalding. So physical problems, like things that are in the environment that are causing physical problems, usually have like pretty obvious signs that there's something wrong with it. It's something you look at and you're like, yeah, this doesn't look right. This looks like the plant itself just is not doing well. You can kind of see like, oh, there's something physically very wrong with this plant. On the right-hand side is a tomato. This kind of circular striation is also from lack of water. So when say it's hot for a long time and you don't water, and then all of a sudden you water, or it like rains, the tomato is going to quickly absorb all of that water in the fruit, and basically it's going to cause stretch marks. So the same way we get stretch marks, the tomatoes also get stretch marks. They look kind of similar, which is pretty cool. So I always tell people to pick their tomatoes before a big rain, so that this doesn't happen. Also, if they absorb a lot of water all at once, they don't taste quite as good. So physical problems are often like easy to identify as physical problems because they're pretty predominant. Like you can really see that something's weird. Another thing that we get quite often on the bottom right-hand side, those cucumbers, it looks like half the cucumber matured and the other half didn't. That often happens when they're not fully pollinated. So basically half of the seeds in this cucumber are developing and the other half are not because they were not pollinated. And this can happen either if you have a lack of pollinators. It can also happen if there's like a quick change in temperature and it gets too hot and all the pollinators are like, it's too hot, I have to go hide. So that is something, right? It's a physical problem that we can fix. It's easy to fix. Well, kind of, sometimes easy. And then there's things like disorders, things that are happening often because of a nutrient deficiency. On the left-hand side here, this is tomato rot. So you see it's on the bottom of a tomato. It's like a cankerous sore, and it will start off as a small brown spot and then spread. And this is actually from a lack of calcium in the plant. So not that the soil has a lack of calcium, but that the plant has a lack of calcium. And tomatoes often get this if they have uneven watering. Calcium is released into the plants through quite a bit of moisture. And so if there's not enough moisture in the soil, or there's not enough moisture frequently enough, the plant just won't absorb the calcium even if it's there. And so you get this rot on the bottom. And then on the right, this is also a plant that is just dry. It needs water. Nutrient deficiencies often look like issues on specific parts of the plant. So where a physical issue, right, like a lack of water, often affects the entire plant, nutrient deficiencies usually only affect one part of the plant. So like there's the new growth and the old growth on a plant. And so some nutrient deficiencies affect the older growth, but the newer growth will look healthy. So if you have a plant and all the bigger old leaves look bad, but the brand new leaves look great, that is probably a nutrient deficiency. And this is just like a nice little picture of what some of them look like. Nitrogen is pretty common if you have plants that are kind of yellow. They're not very, they're not very turgid. They don't have enough water. They're kind of like shriveled and sad looking. Oftentimes that's nitrogen being one of the macronutrients that plants need to grow. And then potassium usually looks like yellowing at the tips or the edges of a plant. And on the old growth, not the new growth. So if you have a plant that looks like, only the old growth or only the new growth has a problem, and all of the leaves of the old growth have these yellow spots, it's manganese. So it's kind of, that's kind of a way to tell and keep in your back pocket. You can also use like a key like this. So, just have something like this. You can have a copy of it or something. And, when you go up to your plant, say, okay, is it the lower leaves or the upper leaves? If the lower leaves, like what is it? Is it the leaf is turning yellow, or it's turning purple, or it's yellow but only between the veins, or only the edges are brown, right? These are all different nutrient deficiencies that you can kind of tell just by answering these questions about what it looks like. And then signs of pests. Pests are also pretty easy normally to tell. They look very different than a virus or a fungus or something like that. On the left is a cabbage that is like totally eaten by some cabbage worms, the cabbage moth. You can see there's these big uneven holes, and usually what you're going to see is you'll find the caterpillars themselves. They're usually the same color of the plant, unfortunately, but they're little fat caterpillars. And if you don't find the caterpillars themselves, sometimes what you'll actually see is their poop. The poop will kind of like roll down to where these leaves meet, and you'll find these they look like tiny little green balls. It is called like frass, is insect poop. So if you see that, if you see like the poop itself, you know that you have a pest, even if you don't see the pest. So the first thing that I would do is just look for them and pick them off. In this situation, we have cabbage moths. We always get them. They're all over Southeast Michigan. I kind of expect them. And like I was saying, we get them earlier in the season, not later in the season. So earlier in the season, sometimes I'll just have a row cover over my plants, or I'll go through and I'll pick off the worms first thing in the morning. And then on the right hand side is leaf miner. This is chard. It's a ruby chard. It has a red stem. Chard is similar to spinach, and all of the plants in that family get leaf miner. So that's another thing that can help you figure out what pest you have. Is pests tend to favor particular families. So the cabbage worm or cabbage moth, right? They like cabbage, broccoli, kale, all those plants in the same family. Leaf miner likes amaranth, chard, beets, spinach, those things. And the leaf miner is actually a tiny insect, and it goes between the different layers of the leaves. And so it creates this kind of like weird, lacy, brown effect. And sometimes you can actually see the little worm inside there. You'll see it like moving between the layers. And that is something, they are not killed at low temperatures. They really need a very, very hot compost to kill them. So leaf miner is something that I actually throw in the trash if I find.
May I ask a question back on the cabbage?
Mm-hmm.
Would you try and salvage that? If you were to wash all of that, would you still consider it edible?
I would eat it, but I wouldn't give it or sell it to a friend.
Right. And then with the leaf, the one on the right, did you say leaf miner?
Yep, the leaf miner.
Would you cut off the bad part and still salvage the other, or just get rid of it all?
I would just get rid of it. What I do in situations like this is you want to pull off any leaf that has this damage. Any leaf that has this damage probably has the leaf miners in them, and so you want to physically remove them all. If you're like really, really excited about eating this chard, you could totally cut off the part that has the leaf miner. But I don't know. Seems a little like it would take a long time, so it's not something that I would necessarily do, but you definitely could. None of these things are going to hurt you if you eat them. They're fine. They just don't look good, and sometimes they change the flavor of the plant, so they don't always taste good. Thank you for that question. Have you guys seen this? These are like very common in our area.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you see the cabbage moths, they're white. They look like tiny butterflies. You're like, oh, they're so beautiful, little butterflies. No, they're evil cabbage moths.
I've seen leaf miner on spinach leaves.
Mm-hmm.
They're like a white line.
Yeah. I always say the chard is like spinach's fancy cousin, but they taste very similar. They grow similar. They have the same pests.
I didn't realize that leaf miner was so bad for lack of a
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, I guess I should have started with this, but the thing with pest and disease, right? It's like we're not going for zero, right? We have to have some tolerance for it as organic growers. Um, and having a tolerance for it is good. And also, if you have a plant that just like looks horrible and is totally covered in pests, just pull it out, pull the whole plant out and just start over. There's no reason to like suffer. If you really hate picking caterpillar worms and squishing them, you don't have to do it. You can just pull the plant out and compost it and, start over, or grow something else, or wait until August when it's really hot to grow them. So, sometimes I feel like people get really worried or feel really bad if their plants have pests or diseases, but everyone's plants have pests and diseases. This is we all have it. My friend Norris always says, if you go to a farmer's market stand and there's no holes in any of the leaves, stay away. Pests and diseases exist in the environment. They're normal, they're natural. We are the ones that are like manipulating nature, and like, I'm the one that's like choosing to grow a ton of eggplant in a small space. So like, of course the Japanese beetles are going to come. They love eggplant leaves. They're like, oh, you created a perfect home for me. So just, be easy on yourself. And, sometimes, I don't know. So on the left-hand side here is the Japanese beetles on an eggplant leaf. And, they're really bad for the eggplant. They eat the leaves, but they sure are cool looking. So, just kind of got to go with the flow a little bit with them. These Japanese beetles, they usually come in later in the season. They love eggplant leaves. They can, they eat a lot of different things. They're pretty easy to identify because they have these like really beautiful rainbowy shells. This picture doesn't really show it, but kind of like oil and water shell. They have these like little tiny white spots on the side of them, and they have a hilarious character. They will play dead. So if you brush the plant, they will all fall to the ground and lay on the ground, pretending that they are dead. They are not. They are just pretending. So you need to actually reach down and pick them up. They're something that, I just pick off the plants. I don't spray usually for them. They don't usually do enough damage that they're really going to hurt the plant. I let about, I don't know, maybe an eighth of the leaves be totally eaten, and they still produce eggplant, so it's fine.
Now, when you say you pick them off the plant, you mean you're squishing them, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I pick them off and I put them in a jar.
Of water?
Of alcohol.
Of alcohol. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to add, they also love roses.
Oh, yeah.
And raspberry plants.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I soak a cotton ball in alcohol and put that in the jar. You must have learned that from me.
I did.
Yeah. And then that's where you put all the Japanese beetles.
Mm-hmm. And asparagus beetles.
I absolutely hate Japanese beetles. They're like the bane of my existence.
But they're so beautiful.
Yes, there's a lot of things that are.
So I do wildlife gardening, and I have a more tolerant attitude to plants. Like when I grow vegetables, I say, okay, I'll eat whatever is left.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw lots of Japanese beetles last time. And so I just cut those leaves off and put them on the grass next to the bed.
Yeah, that's fine. I wouldn't put them like on the grass is fine. I wouldn't put them on the soil.
No,
yeah.
Outside the bed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. And sometimes like I'll just go and knock them off. I'll just like hit the whole plant, kind of give it a little whack, and then they all fall off, and then I'll just like go and pick them up. I actually also, there's like people who vacuum them up. That's a thing. Potato beetles too. People will take their vacuums outside and get them. Another common pest that we have is squash vine borer, and they get inside the squash, the stem, which are hollow. And basically what they do is they get in there and they gum it all up. And because they gum it all up, the xylem and the phloem of the plant, basically they can't transport water or nutrients in their veins. And so they wilt like this. And oftentimes you'll see the wilting, and then you'll see closer to the base of the plant that the stems are kind of like brown and mushy, and that's a sign of them. And you can either like cut those out. You can actually cut open the stem and pull them out and get rid of them. You can spray for them, and then also having your ground covered. So pretty much now I only grow zucchini in plastic because it keeps the borers down.
What do you mean by having the ground covered?
So I cover some of my beds in plastic that I cut holes in, and I have my drip irrigation underneath the plastic. And so there's no ground, there's no dirt like exposed on the bed.
So you're saying that they get in, the squash vine borer gets in through the dirt?
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. Okay, I'll have to look that up. Thank you.
They don't like living under the plastic as much.
Okay, thanks.
Also, I don't really like zucchini that much, to tell you guys the truth. And so usually we'll get like 6 of them, and then I'm like, man, I'm done with zucchini. So then they look like this, and I'm like, okay, pull them out. We're done for the year. Just kind of, sometimes it's too much work to take care of them. All right, I'm going to talk about funguses, and then we'll finish up for the night. I think I mentioned before in Ypsilanti, we have powdery mildew all year round. It loves, a bunch of weeds that we have that are native to Southeast Michigan. Powdery mildew basically looks like someone sprinkled flour on the top of your plant. And then there's a similar mildew called downy mildew. But downy mildew starts by these like yellow splotches in between or over the veins that then turn brown. And on the bottom side of the leaf, you'll see like looks more like a black powder. Powdery mildew we get first. Powdery mildew is traveled on the airstream. It usually comes up from the south, or it stays around all year, like in Ypsilanti. And basically what it does is it covers the leaves, and it damages the leaves. On the right-hand side is a squash plant that's like really covered in powdery mildew. So basically covering the leaf like that, it's eating the leaf, so that's harmful, but it's also preventing the leaf from photosynthesizing. So that's how it causes damage. It is something that loves the hot days and the cool nights. Which is Michigan in the summer. So it's just something that pretty much we always have. It's also part why I don't grow a lot of pumpkins. I always plant powdery mildew resistant varieties of zucchini because otherwise I just don't get any. And then I also, look for it. I look for it early in the season. The USDA can actually, if you want, you can sign up for like text messaging from the USDA. When it gets in your area, they'll text message you and let you know it's been spotted. So when you need to start looking for it. And there's a lot of different things that you can use to control it. My favorite is I make a mixture of water and baking soda. With a little soap, and I spray it on the leaves, and the baking soda, actually the crystalline structure, prevents the mildew from replicating. So it like physically prevents the mildew from growing. People use raw milk, you can use vinegar, you can use hydrogen peroxide. Oops, sorry about that. So there's a lot of, more natural things you can do about it. It doesn't like moisture. It travels on the air. So another thing to do is to water the top of your plants early in the day. And it can physically, wash off some of the spores, but then also prevent the spread. Downy mildew spreads in water. So you want to not water your plants later on in the season. And this is also something that I would physically remove. So on the right-hand side is a plant that's like pretty badly affected, but you can see there's some leaves on the left that look better. I would basically remove all of the leaves on the right-hand side and throw them away. And that you're just physically removing, the mildew from your garden. On the top right-hand side, that is what downy mildew looks like on basil. It can get these little like concentric circles, and that's why I pretty much only grow downy mildew resistant varieties of basil in the fall. I have just found that in Ipsy, it's just we just get it, and there's really nothing you can do about it. And so the best thing to do is just plant varieties that aren't as susceptible. Fungus is very often easy to tell that it's a fungus, right? That's what we're looking for. Like, how do you know what's wrong with my plant? Fungus often looks like a fungus because you can see the spores. You can often see like spores or brown spots, and then it kind of gets decrepit looking. Blight is a type of fungus, and early blight is something, we get on tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and that's the Solanum family. And early blight is really easy to tell because it has these concentric circles that kind of look like tree rings. So that is something, right, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to remove those leaves, and then, depending on how much I want that plant to live, I may or may not spray it with something that will kill a fungus. But blight, early blight is pretty bad. And late blight, it doesn't get this concentric circle. It gets more like dark brown spots on the stem of the plant. You can kind of see on the right-hand side at the top, it like started off with this little browning on the stem, and then it's like multiplying, so you see the spores coming up. And both of these things are things that I would throw away or put in our like far compost pile, not put in my compost. And these are also things that you can be the vector of. So, washing your hands between touching plants or whatever tools you're using is pretty important. And then for signs, looking for bacteria. Bacteria often has more regular shaped spots and coloring. On the left-hand side, this is bacterial speck. And it starts off with these tiny brown circles, and then it gets this halo of yellow around it. So if you see something with a halo, that's usually a bacterial problem, where like with the fungus, right, it kind of just starts as like a yellow splotch. This starts as a brown splotch and then gets the yellow halo. So this is like a bacteria problem. Black rot is quite common in our area. It affects cabbages, broccoli, things in that family. It lives in the soil, so it's something that it's a good reason you don't want to plant cabbage in the same bed every year, because the black rot can multiply. And you'll start off again with these like brown splotches, and then you get this yellow halo that kind of comes onto it. And then viruses often have more angular effects. So on the bottom here, this is mosaic virus, and what you see is these like angular yellow shapes on the leaves. That is the virus. You can see it up on a green bean and on the right on some chard as well. The viruses, right? They do look. I think they look different. They're like different shapes. They don't have this like halo effect, and they don't start off with like a dark brown decrepit looking thing. So you can often tell if it's a virus that way. Also, viruses will sometimes on tomatoes, right? You'll get these like concentric spots. You'll get the between the veins, these spots, and then also like on tomatoes, viruses often like hit very fast. So the same way that they hit people, right? That like all of a sudden it's like you have a tiny bit of virus, then you're like, oh my God, they've multiplied. They're taking over. So if you have a plant, like a tomato plant that one day looks great and then the next day just the entire plant looks horrible, it's probably a virus. And so the best thing to do in this case, right, in the virus, is to just get rid of it. So anytime I find a tomato plant with viruses like this, I pull it out right away. I just like don't want it. And this virus in particular, tomato wilt virus, is actually spread by a little thing called a thrip. And sometimes you can actually see the thrips on your plants. They're brown or they're like a tiny white color. And if you start seeing a lot of those, then it's a clue for you to look out for virus. So these are all just like different clues to kind of figure out exactly what's wrong with your plant. And then, and then the next thing is to decide on your action. So what you're going to do about it. Are you going to take a physical management approach? Are you going to spray a pesticide? What are you going to do about it? And of course, always removing a plant is an option as well.
Well, I just have to say, I hope ignorance is bliss, because I have now learned more problems with plants. I don't want to know about all these problems. I hope I don't have to deal with these things.
I hope you don't either.
And I'm thinking I'm going to end up with no vegetable plants in my garden.
Well, and that's the thing, like the viruses, the tomato, like if I have a tomato plant that looks like that, I'm definitely going to pull it out. But that cabbage, I don't care if my cabbage is holy. I'm just going to chop it up anyway. So, it's really up to you. And, as long as you're not aiming for perfection, you won't be totally disappointed, hopefully.
How much water do you put into the garden? Because the thing with the tomatoes, like overwatering, underwatering, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a measurement to put water into the garden?
Well, I will have this as a teaser for our class next week. So one of my favorite words that I shared with you guys, evapotranspiration. So if you want to do an actual measurement, like actually how many ounces or cubic feet of water do I need to put in to your garden, you can do that by doing the equations of how much evapotranspiration you're having. So how big the plant is, right? The bigger plants are going to take more water from the soil and release more. And the hotter the day and the sunnier the day, there's more evaporation. For large farms, the USDA lets people know what the evapotranspiration rate is for different crops. Again, you can get text alerts. It's amazing. Farming is crazy nowadays. You just get text alerts on your phone about like how much to water through weather stations. But, look at your plant. The bigger the plant, the more water it's going to need, right? The smaller the plant, the less water it's going to need. The deeper the roots of the plant, the more water you're going to have to put down at a time for the water to penetrate deep enough to get all of those roots. Because remember, it's the water mixing with the soil and the bacteria and funguses that allows the plant to absorb the nutrients. So it's like the water creates like a nutrient solution in the soil that then the bacteria and the funguses like have a party with the plant root hairs to absorb the nutrients. So a tomato plant, you're going to need to put down more water for a longer period of time for it to get like 6 feet down. Where a radish that's only, 2 inches deep, you can water just a tiny bit and that plant can absorb that water. And then you were saying with tomatoes, so before I harvest tomatoes, I don't water them. I usually cut water off a couple days before I'm going to harvest. And before rain, I'll go and harvest all of the tomatoes.
I want to ask you a question about your irrigation system. So you're basically watering via the root. Is there a better time of day to water? And for those who don't have an irrigation system, do you primarily want to keep that hose down towards the roots and not put water over the entire plant?
Yes. All right. I'm just going to just tell you the story that I'll tell next week. You guys will know the whole plot. Basically, when you water a plant, you're not actually watering the plant. Like the plant doesn't need water on its leaves, right? It doesn't absorb, like they absorb a little bit of water through their leaves, right? But they drink through their roots. So when you water, you want to water the roots, not the plant. So the lower you can get that water, the better you're going to be. right? If you set up a sprinkler, not only if a gust of wind comes, it's going to like blow that water away from your plants, but that water is going to land on top of your plants, and then it has to like fall from the plant to the ground and then be absorbed into the ground and then penetrate down to where the roots are. So, you know, think about watering this. You're watering the soil, you're watering the roots, you're not watering the plant itself. And watering in, you know, the morning is usually better. When it's cooler and less windy is also better.
What you know, I organized the Faith and Food Garden at my church, and getting people, volunteers, not to water the entire plant is challenging, and asking them to keep that hose, the wand, down towards the roots is something that not everybody does. Is there, if people are working during the day and the only time they can water is at night, and they're watering at night and they're watering the whole plant, won't that also increase the chances for mildew?
Yes, it will, especially later in the season when we have downy mildew as a problem in Southeast Michigan. However, what I will say is that many gardens, the goal of the garden is not to produce as much food as possible. Oftentimes the goal of the garden is to like give people joy or bring people together, or, you know, create habits in which we interact with the food system. And so, you know, you really just have to think about what the most important part of that garden is. And if you're trying to produce a lot of food, then you want to act like a farmer. If
Yes.
you're right, but that's very different. Farmers and gardening is not the same thing.
Yeah, and it's a fine balance between what does food gatherers get and the joy that people have.
Mm-hmm.
You're right.
Yep. And if, you know, if you're like, we want to grow as much food as possible, right? Having small gardens with volunteers is not going to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Farming is something that works at scale, because you can only get efficiencies at scale, right? And so, I mean, the other thing to remember is, right, is farming is really hard and it is not profitable, right? Most vegetable farms in the United States don't even make enough money to pay a wage to the farm owner. 70% of farm owners, small and medium vegetable farmers, have to have another job just to pay their rent and other costs. So, you know, really think about why you have a garden and like what benefits you're getting from it, and what are the social benefits. And, you know, giving food to food gatherers is great. But, you know, if those people, you know, worked a couple extra hours and gave that money to a farmer, you'd get a lot more food.
Yes. Thanks. You know, it's always good to be mindful of that.
Yeah. That said, I have a small garden and I love spending time in my garden. So, you know.
Me too. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I really appreciated all of your questions. And next week, we're going to talk about, we'll talk a little bit more about irrigation, and we'll talk about crop care as well. So thank you guys so much. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy this beautiful summer weather.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.